Welcome and thank you for attending the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association's 36th Annual Sustainable Agriculture Conference. You have joined the session 55 Little Legal Nuggets in 55 minutes. My name is Jacob Leach. I'm CFSA's Associate Executive Director for Operations, and I'm going to be the workshop host. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, put your questions and comments in the chat throughout the session. And as the title suggests, we're going to try to get through 55 little legal nuggets in the next 55 minutes. So with a little luck, there might be some time left to respond to comments and questions. Please remember our community agreements and keep them in mind when you engage in chat or participate in the group discussions. Our speakers are Anna and Jonathan Williams of Cedar Grove Law, located in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Cedar Grove Law is one of our sponsors for this conference. Without the support of Cedar Grove Law and all of our sponsors, we could not make an event like this happen. So check them out under the sponsors page or in the trade show rooms to get some more information about the services that they provide. So I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Jonathan and Anna. And good luck. I'll be around. Enjoy the session.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We are really excited to be here. I am Anna. This is Jonathan, John, and we also have in our chat today one of our favorite people, KB Burson. They will be helping us out with tallying, hopefully, what will be your participation in the polls. And most importantly, you're going to see little numbers on the bottom of each slide. If you want to talk more about that, if that slide is interesting to you or you have questions, put that number in the chat and we'll have KB tally that. And at the end, hopefully we have some time. We originally had scheduled this to be a 75-minute conversation live, and we're making it work. So we will definitely take that feedback and for sure give you an opportunity to set up quick consultations with us if you didn't kind of hear exactly what you needed to hear. So really quickly, we have a poll. We want to start with a poll for the slide, if you will. Really quickly, we have arranged the nuggets. One more, please. Our nuggets are just that, little tips, little nuggets, tiny little things that can help kind of hopefully warp speed your knowledge and of how to handle some of these legal topics. They are arranged here on your screen. This is one of the only times you're going to see them arranged. We're jumping around on purpose today amongst many of these topics and what we find interesting, because that's the way law happens to us. We don't have the opportunity a lot of times to sit down and have full-fledged discussions on employment law and how we want to set up our business to operate well and to be compliant and contemplate all the things that come to us. So if you want to have kind of a semblance of what we're going to be talking about today, these are the topics. So that's our first poll question. Please, I think you can see the polls. Can everybody see the polls? If you could cast your first votes for topics that you already know you want to hear more about. Is that something you guys can do? Not sure. I'm having trouble seeing if that's possible. I think the polls, can somebody chat me if we can or can't see polls? Oh, good. Yay. I hear they're working. It's okay. Cool. I'm excited to see how you guys answer, and we'll try and be quick about the topics that you don't necessarily. Okay, here we go. 33, avoiding risk, 50% land use, 25% when you don't need a lawyer. Okay, cool. We got this covered. So let's get right to it. We are going to move quickly. It's exciting. Here we go.
All right, lease terms. Hello, everybody. And by lease terms, I'm talking about how long your lease is for, not necessarily all the terms in the lease, but when it terminates. Is it a month-to-month lease? Is it a year lease, year-to-year? Do you have a fixed set of years? This is a very important aspect to know going into any sort of lease for land. How long have you got it? That's all spelled out in the term section. So make sure you know how long you're leasing, how short, how long, and that if you want to renegotiate or extend it, you also have in other options to do that. But make sure you know how long you're leasing. And I'm going to hand it off to Anna. Next
All right,
slide,
next
please.
slide. So the next slide here is identification of risk. So we're going to kind of come back to this thought today on multiple fronts. And really what's most important when you're identifying risk that you want to essentially shield your business and your farm from is having really frank conversations. Frank, get it? Frank. Frank conversations means that you are willing to be honest with yourself. You're willing to be honest with those that are working with you, partners, family members, out at the outset of any agreements that you may enter into together, but also during the course of your work together. And so one of the very first things we have to do when we're talking about identifying risk, it's not just saying, okay, I have a farm, it's inherently dangerous. There's going to be livestock, there's going to be, we're going to sell value-added goods and those types of risk. We're talking about specific to you, because while having a goat farm and having goat yoga might have inherent risks, your real risk might be the neighbor that is an adamant firearms user on the weekends. That might be the real risk to sustaining your business. And so that's one of the things we want to keep coming back to, is really being honest about what are your actual risks. Next slide.
All right, lease renewal options. This kind of ties on to the last topic we had on lease terms. So let's say you've got a 10-year lease, and at the end of that 10-year lease, what are you going to do? Do you have a renewal option? And the big nugget takeaway from this is that option one-sided, meaning just one person can exercise it and then automatically renew it for another 10 years? Or does it require both parties? This can be a big issue if it's not clear in the contract. Oftentimes, it can be ambiguous. So you want to take away any ambiguity, any confusion, any vagueness, and make sure it's clear that it's either both parties have to sign off on the renewal, or if you want it to be automatic, make sure it says so and that you comply with the time period. There's ordinarily a time period within so many months of the lease expiring, terminating. Make sure you hit it in that time period, or you may be out of the window on that. Next, please.
Okay, contracting around risk. So moving on with that thought process. That we've got beehives here. That might be your obvious risk, right? So we talked a little bit about some of them not so obvious risks. The good news is there are a lot of options out there that you can use contractually to shield yourself from a lot of those issues. Insurance is a big one. We'll come back to that in a moment, but just understand that when you have identified some of those issues, contracts can really help you, whether it's bees and getting a liability waiver in place because you're worried about somebody having an allergic reaction, or making sure that your yoga collaborator has their own insurance for yoga practice. We'll come back and talk more about those things later. Next.
Right of first purchase or right of first refusal. This can be a contract in and of itself where you just spell out who gets the first right of purchase. And this typically involves land. If someone's leasing land from the landowner and in the lease or separately from the lease, you get a right of first purchase, right of first refusal. That gives you, as the tenant, the person renting the land, the option, should the owner ever decide to sell it, to decide if they want to buy it. So there's usually a time period when the owner comes and says, hey, I've decided to sell my land. I'm going to allow you the opportunity to exercise the first right of purchase. You've got X number of days, usually, anywhere from 1 week to a few weeks to decide. So you have that time period. If you decide you want to buy it, you can. And if you don't, then it gets to go on to the next person. And the next slide, please.
That's you.
Oh, that's me again. Lease rate increases. What's that all about? All right. So you sign a lease, you've got a rate. It's, an annual lease. You pay X number of dollars a year. And then the next year it goes up. Well, sometimes built into the lease is a percentage increase annually. If that's something you're okay with, that's fine, but be on the lookout for it. Oftentimes generic leases will have that if they're written by the landowner, or it's a company that leases, they'll oftentimes have it very one-sided to the person on the land leasing it to the tenant. So if this is something you're okay with, that's fine, but be on the lookout for it because sometimes it might jump up and surprise you. Next.
We'll go to the next slide. Maybe the next slide. The next slide, I'm going to keep moving, is liability waivers. And when that beautiful slide comes onto your screen, there's going to be a wave, like a fun little wave. No, I just am joking, but what we mean when we talk about liability waivers, the nugget here is this. If you have a situation on your farm where you have been unable to get insurance because your insurance carrier has said that's just an inherently risky business, we are not going to insure that, then you need a liability waiver. That is really your best bet, your best option to try and create really a better solution when that happens, because that's really why it's uninsurable, right? It's because the likelihood of it happening is great and the likelihood of injury or damage is high. And so the nugget is get your liability waivers in place anytime you're unable to get insurance for that. Now, the other thing to think about with liability waivers is, and sorry about we're in downtown Hillsborough.
It's Saturday.
Another thing, one other really quick thing about liability waivers is that it's not going to prevent you from being sued. You are going to be sued, right? Like if someone's injured, those things will still happen. It doesn't prevent and mandate that someone not be able to sue you. But what it does is it creates evidence really down the road for the understanding that everybody had at the time they entered into it. When they signed up for the butcher class, they understood that was inherently risky. So next slide.
All right. Lease default provisions. Now, so what do I mean by default? There's a couple of different ways. There's default provisions that the state will provide in their statutes if you don't address it in the lease. So by default, these rules will apply. But there's also, what if you are in default of the lease? Oftentimes it's for, get behind on payment. Usually you see payment default issues. That's pretty straightforward and pretty clear. But there's other parts that come in, especially in some of the lengthier contracts. What if you're doing something you didn't realize you weren't supposed to do on the land, or you've constructed something in a spot you weren't supposed to, and you've got a landowner that's not very understanding and they are very strict and by the book on their lease, and they say, hey, look, according to this provision, you built somewhere you weren't supposed to. And under the terms, we can evict you in however many days that's set out in the contract. So be on the lookout for means of defaulting on the lease other than non-payment. People often think it's non-payment, but sometimes it can be for using land or doing something that would otherwise trigger a default. So be on the lookout for those in your lease. Next slide, please.
All right, so subdividing land. Just a quick note here. A lot of times we think about protecting our farm by putting it into an LLC, but there are often times where subdividing land can actually be helpful in shielding liability, helping you avoid risk in agritourism. One situation might be that you have a land a homeowner who lives on the property but doesn't really have much to do with the farm or agritourism, right? Maybe they've owned the land for a long time and they live there. They may have a life estate for the piece of land. Subdividing that piece is really smart because you can shield that residential area from the business, from other land that might at some point become subject to a litigation if there were injuries as a result of the farming or the agritourism. So just a quick note, subdividing land's not always bad.
Next slide, please. All right, leases. We're doing a lot on leases today.
Are you ever going to stop talking about leases?
I hope. Owner reserved rights and the tenant's quiet enjoyment. What does all that mean? Well, one, for the tenant, the quiet enjoyment is pretty straightforward. You should be able to enjoy your land quietly, or the land you're leasing without anyone interfering, particularly the landowner. Some landowners, it's not an issue. They want to let you lease it and then they're gone. They're never around. They may even live out of state or out of the city or out of town somewhere. And then you have others who still want to be involved, who may want to come around and, see what's going on, or, hike down to their favorite fishing hole or whatever it may be. this should be spelled out in the lease so that there's no, miscommunications or, different sets of expectations when it comes to leasing the land and what the owner expects to be able to do and what the tenant expects to be able to do without the owner, snooping around. Not necessarily snooping around, but you know what I mean. So make sure this is addressed and spelled out in the lease. Next slide, please.
I think you have another one.
Still going. Leases. Extra provisions for farmers. Andrew and their group spoke on this earlier, talking about how specific you need to be in the lease, especially for farmers. Oftentimes, folks will pull leases that are residential leases, and they're good. They're fine, especially for leasing homes or apartments or stuff, but they don't have the provisions that are specific for farmers, people leasing land, agricultural-related enterprises or activities, whatever it may be. The lease needs to be specific for that. Quite frankly, you're not going to pull a residential lease that covers that stuff. Now, there are some provisions that may be helpful, but make sure this is drafted, front to back, specifically for your agricultural land, what have you needs. Next slide, please.
And we're going to take a pause right quickly and do our next poll question. So let's see if I have the correct notes here. The next poll question is going to be, do you have a will or a trust? So let's just take a quick poll and see. And then if so, 12% of people say no. All right. Well, that's 80. That's awesome. That is wonderful, because we have another poll question, just kind of a logical flow from here. And the next poll is what percentage of Americans had a will? Oh, wait. Oh, is it still moving? It's like moving back and forth. Is that happening?
Oh man, it's coming down to the wire.
Oh, switch it. Okay. Wow. So still good. That's okay. That's we'll talk about it. So let's do that. Let's actually go to that next poll question. I think it might make more sense, right? So let's go to the next poll that is asking you, what percentage of Americans do you think had a will according to a 2020 Gallup poll? And I believe it's like a kind of a multiple choice. Cast your vote based on that data, right? 89% of you say you do not have a will. Let's see. Can you see the answer? Do you guys know the answer? Does it tell you? I don't know.
Maybe you should tell them.
Should I tell them? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it moving. I'm hoping that you guys were able to vote and at least had the thought in your brains about having a will versus not having a will. Oh, good. Great. So if you'll tally, that's awesome. So the answer is 46% of people had a will. So less than half of you. Look at that right there. Love it. So you guys were on the right track, right? Here's the thing. There's 100% chance. This isn't a risky thing. 100% chance you are going to die. All of us. And I kind of say that in a joking way, but I'm serious, right? I didn't say dead serious. But the thing is, I do kind of make light of it, but it is a reality. All of us have got to face this, particularly when we have people, we have animals, we have produce, we have beautiful land that we steward. And so it's so important for all of us to have wills. Every single person on this call needs a will. And most of you guys need trust. And we'll talk a bit about that in this next question, in this next slide here. The reality is wills really speak to you as a person, right? They talk about what would happen to your things if something were to happen to you. Whereas trusts really speak more to your assets. I like to think of trust like this box here on this slide. It's putting all your stuff into a box, and that box is locked up. You're the only one with the key, or you and your spouse are the ones with the key. And then later over time, or if something were to happen to you, you would be telling by way of your trust who can unlock that box and do things with those assets, right? And maybe it's multiple people. Maybe it's one person who handles finances, one person handles physical assets. But trusts are an important mechanism. We could have literally 3 more conversations about conversations about trust. The last thing I'll say is people don't realize that you've also statistically have a 50% chance of becoming incapacitated. Wills don't speak to your incapacity. Trusts speak to your incapacity. If you're injured really badly on working on the farm or off the farm, your incapacity, your inability to make those decisions is not gonna, your will is not gonna address those issues. So we need to make sure we get those in place. All right, next.
All right, leases, specific types of farming. All right, so this kind of ties into the last point I made on leases, and I'll play a little catch-up time here. Mainly, so if you're going to be a peacock farmer, put that in the lease, because just saying you're leasing land to farm, that may mean something different to someone else, the landowner or the neighbors. You get into other issues, and we'll tie in more to the nuisances and things of that later on in this presentation. But main thing is, whatever you're farming, you're doing, spell it out, but also leave some room to expand. You may, hey, I'm going to do beehives, vegetables, fruits, peacocks, and other types of farming as things go on, something like that, but make sure it's in there. Next slide, please.
All right, the next slide speaks to, we're moving a little bit into some employment law, employment classifications really quickly. You've got interns, volunteers, employees, 1099 contractors. You might call it one thing, but the federal government and state government might consider it another. So just because you call it something doesn't make it so. We want to be really sure that you are classifying your employees correctly. I mean, ideally, you would call them the correct things as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. If you want to hear more about employment law, put in the chat the number of the slide, and that goes for any of them, and we'll spend more time on it.
Next, please. All right. Put farming. Is this yours?
It can be. I mean, it can be either one.
Go ahead.
All right.
I'll jump in for a second.
Look, you've heard this. This is not a nugget, right? The nugget is that if you don't currently have an LLC, now is the time. There are certain instances where an LLC is not the right business formation for you, but most of the time for our farmers, it is. You are ready right this minute. I don't know if you've been in business or going to be in business or are finally deciding it's time to kind of make some of those business decisions. It's time to put it into an LLC, most likely, and you'll sleep like this little puppy because you'll know that you've protected your personal assets from the liabilities that inherently come with your farming operation.
Right. LLC is usually it. Maybe a corporation, might be a cooperative, but that's probably what you're going to need.
Okay, performance licenses. If you are an agritourism business and you have people performing live music on your property, or you are playing music on your property, like a Spotify, that kind of thing, you may not know this, but you need a performance license. I bring this up because we actually had this situation. I think it was last year, a client contacted us. It was a farmer's market who got a nice little cease and desist letter and a welcome to pay this license letter from a performance rights organization because they had live music at their farmer's market. And it may not seem like it matters that this folk artist was playing someone else's, like a cover song, right, of someone's work, but that's actually a violation of copyright law. And if you think about it from the point of view of the artist, right, it's very important that that artist be able to protect their works. And so performance rights organizations exist. They can create blanket licenses. A lot of times they're not that expensive, but it's so easy with social media for the representatives that work for these organizations to find you and determine that you have done illegally used copyrighted works. So performance licenses are a must if you're performing music on your few exceptions, nonprofits, some wedding ceremonies, but get one.
My turn. Easements over land. One of my favorite topics. I could spend all day on easements and the different types, but the big nugget here is get it in writing and get it recorded, regardless of what agreement you may have or the custom that it's been on using a driveway or a path or access to some water, a water source, a pond, whatever it may be, get it recorded, because if something ever comes up, it will save you lots of headaches, legal fees, and other nightmares. The law will supply certain easements. You may get a easement by necessity, implied easement, lots of others, but point is, don't rely on the law. Get your own in writing and get it recorded. Next, please.
So documenting HR, human resources is what I mean when I say HR. If you have seasonal employees, if you have full-time employees, if you have interns, if you have 1099s that come to the site and do some work on your farm, you need to document that that's happening. Document times that they work. There's lots of apps out there that can help you with this, but it's really important that you're putting your ducks in a row there because inevitably when things go wrong, when things go bad, the first thing that a legal entity is going to ask you, the government is going to ask you is to show the documentation that you paid somebody this much on this day. Make sure that you're documenting all of that.
All right. Landlord-Tenant Act. All right. This really doesn't come into play a whole lot other than when part of the lease agreement or the setup that you have involves leasing for residential, for living purposes. Let's say part of the arrangement is you're going to live on the land where you're working. The Landlord-Tenant Act comes into play. Now, there's agricultural law that applies directly to agricultural type leases, but even within those leases, if someone's residing there, know there are certain rules and requirements that must be followed, for both purposes of a landlord, if you're trying to evict or have any issues, and if you're a tenant. There's a lot more rights associated with the Landlord-Tenant Act than there are with the Agricultural Lease Act. Next slide, please.
This next slide speaks to insurance. It's important to mention that here because there's actually so many different opportunities and options for insurance these days. You can add riders for single events. You can add riders for UPIC. I mean, the options are endless. What is most important, the nugget here, is to call your agent. Develop a relationship with your agent. Don't assume that your agent understands that when you say strawberry farm, that would also inherently mean that you're going to have some chickens on site. You would be surprised at how easy it is to insulate yourself with small policies with riders, but your insurance agent needs to know that. Developing a great relationship with your insurance agent to understand what you actually have covered is so important, because we have seen on the back end where somebody thought they were covered with one thing and it ended up only covering another. That's pretty common in several types of business, but farming is inherently just different and more and dynamic. So make sure you're talking to your agent.
Tell them everything. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your insurance person. Tell them everything. Next, please. Agricultural tenancies by county. Okay. Is this yours or mine?
All 100 counties you're going to go? No.
One at a time. We'll start alphabetically. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So I won't get into this much, but just kind of a fun fact. There are a handful of counties in North Carolina where, long story short, a calendar year under the agricultural statute for tenancy is December 1st to December 1st. For whatever reason, they did that. And there is reason for that, but I don't have time here to elaborate. But just know that in certain counties in North Carolina, this may be the case in South Carolina too, depending on the laws and such. You could have an old law like this that says, well, if you're in one of these counties, your calendar year is different. Let's say you have to leave the premises for whatever reason by March of the year, and you're not able to, harvest and get your crops out. Well, instead of having till December 1st, in these counties, you have till December 31st. So you need to know that both as a tenant and a landowner. Yeah. Next slide, please.
All right. This is one of my favorites. At our office, I affectionately call the work that we do office law and dirt law. This is kind of in the context of employment law for purposes of our talk today. And what I mean here is that if you have employees on your farm doing work in the dirt, doing work harvesting, doing work with animal husbandry, the rules for employment are slightly different than if you have hired somebody to do your social media, to do your books, to go to market for you. And so it's important that if you're treating those employees exactly the same, that there actually are some nuances that you'd want to contact us, would probably be a good place to start. We can get you in contact with somebody to make sure that you're handling those employees in the proper way.
Next slide, please. All right, disputes. All right, so there's all sorts of disputes. What do I mean by that? I mean, you can be internally within folks working in an operation together on land or in a agricultural related business. There's also your neighbors, contract disputes with sales, with vendors, with CSA agreements. Regardless of your dispute, it doesn't all have to end in litigation or somebody suing somebody. There's lots of ways, lawyers can help you other than just going to court. So I want you to know that if something arises don't hesitate. Give us a call, give a lawyer a call to check on something, just to know your options, because you may be able to solve it with a letter from an attorney, or any other sort of route other than just taking it to court. So be mindful that with disputes, your lawyer can be an asset and resource for things other than just suing somebody.
Yeah. And I would say if you see it coming, if you have a disgruntled employee, if you see that, there's an injury, there's a kind of a disagreement over what happened in an incident, go ahead and call an attorney. It is far cheaper to engage earlier than it is to kind of wait until things really fall apart and there's a lot of emotion involved. And then you engage, because at that point, there's really not as much that we can help navigate, because people are already, feelings are hurt, stakes are high.
Right.
Next slide. I think this is you.
Water rights. All right. So in North Carolina, you have what they call riparian rights. And so with the riparian rights, any water that, let's say you have a creek or a stream or a lake by your property, you have rights to use that water. Any water that's up against it, you have rights to it. Now you can't use that right to the detriment of others that also share those rights. Like you can't build a dam or a levee to try to divert water resources that folks down the stream could be getting. There's certain limits. It's got to be reasonable. You can't be obviously, tampering with it or contaminating it. Also, there's surface water rights and below surface. Water on your land, under the ground, you get a lot more wiggle room to get away with things, but stuff above ground, people are sharing, a little more restrictive. Next slide, please.
Copyright and trademark law. I have a picture of a miner painting a lovely picture on your farm. You guys had an event, invited people to come and paint pictures, and this miner has just created a copyrightable work. It's so interesting when you start to think about copyright law and all the things that you are creating on a regular basis that are not related to your farm per se. Your intellectual property has value. Other people's intellectual property has value. Some more than others, right? This may just end up on a refrigerator, no big deal. But you just be thoughtful about that. Anything from processes to in Excel spreadsheets, for example, operating manuals that you've created for a certain way that you farm, those things are all proprietary. And while you may be very willing to share in these conferences that we come to, that's wonderful. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing. But just be understanding that not everybody feels that way. And the last nugget here is telling, like online, I see people a lot of times saying, I don't own the rights to this music, right? Or giving credit to the person who took the picture is not enough. Equate to permission. So understand that in order, when you're reposting, it's great to give, and social media is a much grayer area, but understand before you actually take someone's picture, something that they've taken, or use their artwork, make sure that you have permission to do that. And understand that it's okay for you to ask for permission to use yours. Next slide. That's you.
Eviction. All right. Dreaded eviction. This more pertains to, again, if you're residing or living on the land. Under Landlord-Tenant Act, there are more rules, more stringent requirements of providing notice. You can't just, give somebody the boot like you could if it's just for farming purposes. Now, there are rights and restrictions when it comes to agricultural evictions as well, but remember, they're different. If you're living there, there's a different set of rules than if you're just farming there. Keep that in mind. Next, please.
You're next. You're again.
I'm ready. Conservation easements. All right. Katie, Annette, and Andrew spoke about this some earlier. Conservation easements, it's a good asset, a good tool to have when you're farming for a few reasons. One, it can help protect the land. Also, it can provide income for the farmer looking to acquire land or to lease land. Just remember that with the conservation easements, they're very restrictive. So whatever land is subject to the easement, you don't have a lot of flexibility with what you do with it. So keep that in mind.
Conflicts of interest. So just note when you're putting together agreements, leases with family members in particular, be thoughtful that you include a clause. We like to do that a lot of times, even when the parties are great friends. Make sure we have a clause that says everybody was able to talk to their own attorney, because one of the things in law, we have to make sure that we aren't representing, they're not adverse parties, but they're parties with separate interests, right? We want to make sure that we're not setting up a lease to the detriment of another person. We want to make sure they've had the opportunity to seek independent counsel before they sign off. Maybe completely comfortable working with the same attorney, that's fine, but just think about that. Have that conversation. Make sure that if you're working with an attorney that they're contemplating that before they just assume that everybody's working together. And hey, really fast, I want to add one quick other note about those right there. Yeah, those round hay bales. Should we tell them about the USDA?
What?
Oh, it's this rule. It's this new rule. They're going to outlaw those bales altogether. You know why?
What?
Because livestock aren't getting square meals.
Wow. All right.
Next slide.
Please. All right. Restrictive covenants. All right. So this doesn't come into play a lot, but occasionally you see it, especially some of these bigger farms where someone has acquired land with the idea of subdividing it and setting up different plots for, I don't know, a neighborhood, community, whatever it may be. And when they do that, they set up sometimes a homeowners association, but they'll have rules, restrictions, and covenants that apply to that land. And some of these plans may have been abandoned long ago, but the restrictions and covenants get recorded. And if they've been recorded and not removed or changed, they're still in place. So beware of this. So if you're leasing or purchasing land, a good title search can solve this. Attorney or title company would be able to determine this for you. So be on the lookout for restrictive covenants. Next, please.
Get
yes.
it? Declare. The squirrel is declaring.
Got it. Declaratory judgments. All right. So this goes back kind of to disputes, and this is sort of a what would you say, a lawsuit light. Instead of suing somebody in your typical way of suing them, taking them to court and going through the long, lengthy litigation process, you can do kind of a milder not sue, but just file for a declaratory judgment. And if this comes up when I was talking about the ambiguities or miscommunications in leases or contracts, you can have a judge make a ruling on that ambiguity. Well, this person interprets it this way, this one that way. You can get a ruling, and then that interprets it, and then you've got set law. So that will tell you what to do going forward, and you don't have to get in long, lengthy litigation. Next, please.
I'll take the next two. So cease and desist letters, just really quickly, we'll talk about if you receive one, you should probably contact a lawyer and not try to handle that yourself. Again, like I said, the sooner in the process you can get in front of an attorney to help you navigate, the better. On the other hand, you may be in need of sending one. So certainly that's something where you'd want to engage an attorney to make sure that we're setting forth the right steps and using the right language to make sure that we're setting a case up for resolution, really. So we'll go on to the next slide. And the next slide, it speaks to work product clauses, a little bit into the employment law / intellectual property area. I really like to have work product clauses in employment agreements, 1099s, or even just policy manuals that you have employees sign, to be really clear about who owns the work product created on your farm. If you've got an employee that's routinely taking pictures of your produce, pictures of your animals, do you own that, or does your employee own that? A lot of times it doesn't matter. But locally here, we've got a lawsuit going on. We're not part of it, but I'm following it closely, where something similar has happened. Basically, there was just a disagreement with a farm manager and farm owner, and then now there is the subject of intellectual property and who owns what. So be really thoughtful about work product clauses.
All right, notice of takings. This is where the government swoops in and takes your property for whatever reason. They don't have to have many good reasons anymore. Essentially, economic now is the go-to, and they can make an economic reason for anything. So just be on the lookout if you get a letter from the county, from the state. Usually it's going to be the county or local municipality wanting to take your land to run a sewer line or to put up another strip mall. Big point here is the laws are really built to favor these governmental entities, as you might suspect. However, even though your best chances of winning is not in court, the court of public opinion is where you can win this. So remember that. There's ways to rally around this. get word out, and you can run off a lot of these developers. That's your best route. Next, please.
So the next is confidentiality agreements. So the one point I'll make here, when you're hiring somebody, when you have volunteers on your property, interns, visitors, even in some cases, confidentiality agreements are great if you have proprietary information that you don't want shared. We have a client right this minute who's dealing with a client list that was taken. So there was no confidentiality agreement in place, no work product clause. So is that okay? I mean, basically, we don't have anything clearly established that says, no, you may not take the things that you see on this property, the drama that, the family members bring to the table, and talk about it online. You can create these and protect yourself a lot, or at least have recourse, and make it very clear to courts that you did not intend for that to happen. Next slide. Oh yeah, everybody wanted to talk about this. Okay, so a lot of you did. You really don't always need us. Happy to share that. One of my favorite go-tos when we first are encountering somebody starting to farm is exactly CFSA. And we love CFSA. We love Farm Commons. There's lots of resources available to educate yourself. It's kind of that 37th nugget, but kind of working backwards here. Education is great. We encourage our folks to kind of understand and have a working knowledge of what they kind of want to do, but also to come to the table and be flexible, that you don't always know what you don't know. And that's really where lawyers can help. But you don't need us to kind of create this broad knowledge of the things you're passionate about, including law related to farming. Rules and regulations. This would include things like USDA certifications, how to sell your value-added goods at market. They're very well thought out. There's lots of checklists and tips from actual government entities that can guide you along. You don't really need us for that. Interpretation, we can help if you needed us, but generally speaking, you're not going to need to engage a lawyer. You can trust what you're reading. And then the other big thing is procuring insurance. You really don't need a lawyer for that. There's not a lot of leverage that we could help you bring to the table. They usually are what they are. You don't get to kind of mark up the contract in a lot of instances and say, we do want this, we don't want that. We don't have the bargaining power really in those agreements. So back to that earlier slide, make a great relationship with your agent. It is the best thing that you can do there. And so we can come back to this if we have time. Okay.
Portable storage buildings. All right, you may be thinking, what does this have to do with anything? But occasionally you will see these on a piece of property you're renting or leasing or about to purchase. Particularly if you're about to purchase it, someone says, hey, we'll even throw in this building. The last tenant here left it when they moved off. Well, unbeknownst to everyone, that building was not theirs to leave or to sell. It was a rental building, and they were renting it pursuant to a rent-to-own agreement. And now that company wants their building back. Well, under the law, they have the right to get it. They can do it the easy way or the hard way. A lot of times, they're willing to go the hard way and get it. So just be on the lookout if there's anything that's portable that looks like it could be moved. And even if it's been attached to something, it could still be moved. Be on the lookout for that.
Is that me or you?
Operating agreements, I'll take it. So operating agreements are basically the rules and guidelines to be followed within an LLC. In corporations, you have bylaws. Within LLCs, you have operating agreements. This is really important because it sets out the rules. It sets out the officers, who's ever going to be the president, the field manager, the packing president, any of those roles, and what you expect of anybody in there, and voting, all sorts of things. This can be laid out, spelled out in the operating agreement. Very important to have.
Similarly and related is business succession planning. So this is separate from estate planning and creating a trust for your personal assets. Business succession planning actually can dovetail really nicely with an estate plan for you personally or for you and your family, because your interest in an organization, in your farm, in your LLC or S Corp, whatever you may have, that interest can actually be contemplated in your personal estate plan. And so business succession planning is what happens if to your business, if something happens to you. And remember, we're not always talking about death here. A lot of times we're talking about incapacity, your inability to make decisions. The last thing you want is your non-farming spouse having to make really hard decisions about processing hundreds of poultry during your right in the middle of your season. So business succession planning goes and dovetails really nicely into trusts and estate planning.
Farming with family.
Oh, fun.
There's a picture of me as a kid.
No, I'm joking. That's so bad. I shouldn't say that. That's not true. You should.
So yeah, maybe not, but sit down, explore that, and set out some rules. And listen, this is so important with family because people may think or have the tendency, I know I've been guilty of this, of thinking, I don't need a lawyer. We don't need to set out any rules or have any agreements. It's family. Well, that's the fastest way, in my opinion, to mess up that family relationship. So why not set healthy boundaries? Even if it's with family, treat it just like everything else. And then you keep the business and the family, and you don't have the issues when they cross over.
Yeah.
Next, please.
We firm with family. We can tell you that it's possible, but be smart. Workers' compensation. So
being smart.
Here's the deal. If you are under a certain number of employees, there is a very good likelihood you do not have to carry workers' compensation insurance. Certainly give us a call if you're unsure whether you must carry it or whether that's an option. The nugget here, I'm here to tell you that I'm advising that you carry it no matter what. If you have one employee during a season, still really advise that workers' comp is your best option, because it's not just to protect yourself from the liability that your business would otherwise have if there's a personal injury that occurs to this person while they're working for you. It's also to help your employee. It is not by no means health insurance, but understand that a lot of the employees that are working on your farms may not have health insurance. And so if they're injured on the job, their only ability to have recourse to and help paying those bills would be either work comp stepping in or to sue. Unfortunately, that's really the options that they have. So I really like workers' compensation. It's by far cheaper than having to deal with it on the back end.
We're still going? Okay. Thought we're finished. Sales contracts.
We're good.
All right. So this is a variety of things. I've kind of touched on this earlier, talking about leases and different agreements, but any type of vendor agreement, CSA, especially CSA, they can be very unique. You want to make sure there's some, items that are covered and spelled out so that there's no miscommunications when it comes to items being received and whatnot. But any type of buy or sell arrangement or agreement, have a contract, even if it's just a few pages. And you can have some of these for different occasions, pre-printed, ready to go. Just fill in the name and date with the different folks. And attorneys can, we can help set you up with that.
You've got a slew of them. Keep going.
Next, please. All right. Speaking of nugs, hemp and marijuana. So the big takeaway here is everyone knows hemp's basically legal everywhere now. Marijuana is, not far behind. Big thing here, especially in North Carolina and other states, is cops cannot see or smell the difference between hemp or marijuana. It's scientific. They can't do it. The FBI and SBI have all come out and said officers cannot do it. So this is great for people on both sides. So if you're smoking a joint of marijuana, an officer can't come up, I smell weed. It's like, that's hemp, sir. Or do you know the difference? They can't just come up and arrest you and start searching you based on automatic probable cause anymore. They just can't do it. They've actually got to have a warrant. They've got to do work and come through and prosecute you for weed. And they just don't do it. So this is a great way to push away from the over incarceration for, simple marijuana crimes, and also help promote and push hemp and marijuana into the future. So next, please. All right, rental agreements and the NCRISA. All right, so won't touch on this long. Just be aware that if they're entering into any type of rental agreement, particularly with an option to purchase, not land. So this is for consumer goods, not property. This applies to if you're acquiring a tractor, any sort of equipment, any sort of fungible, movable goods. Be on the lookout, because if it's not compliant with the North Carolina Retail Installment Sales Act, that could be a lot of trouble and money for you as the person leasing it, renting it to someone. And it could be a windfall, get a lot of things for free as someone renting it. So if you're in one of those contracts, I'd recommend having a lawyer look at it. Next, please. Bonafide farming. Katie and Annette and Andrew spoke about this a little bit earlier. Essentially, if you're a bona fide farm, you get a lot of perks and a lot of benefits. One of the big things is established as a bona fide farm, you don't have to worry about certain local, municipal, and county ordinances when it comes to getting permits or building or doing certain things. But do remember, though, that even if you have bona fide farm status, if you're conducting activities that are non-farm related on that farming land, you may not have that protection. So make sure you're careful with what you do in Word, and we can help you out with that as well. Next, please. Present use value. I don't know if I'm kidding. I understand, but it's a lot. There's a lot there. Just know with using present use value of land, it's something you can get treatment for tax purposes, especially. You can defer taxes, not pay nearly as much on it, but be wary with this. Once you get it established, there's ways you can lose it by setting up different arrangements, transferals, those sorts of things. Just, make sure you get this and be careful once you have it. Next, please. Easements for water use. Kind of touched on water rights and easements. Now, this is another way to, if you are on land that doesn't perk, that doesn't have a natural water source, but your neighbor does, or you go across your neighbors to get somewhere. You can set up easements just like you can for using land to run piping or to transport, whatever it may be, or to set up a well that goes over and pumps onto your land. You can get easements for this, easement agreements, and they can be recorded, which is very important. So keep that in mind.
All right. And I'm going to hop into employment. It's hard. This is our last poll question. I'm going to jump right into it. Must a North Carolina agriculture employer provide time off for an employee to attend or be involved at a child's school? What do we think? If you've zoned out, zone back in. Let me see what you think. 30% of people say yes. That's pretty good. That's better. The answer is that's the truth. Yes, you do. Not all farms have to allow nursing mothers time off to nurse or pump, but apparently at some point in a child's development, they do start to value that relationship. So I share this with you to say that is a tip. Here's the next tip. That employment law is hard. It is not always intuitive. There's a question in the chat I can see asking about volunteers. I like to go ahead and say if it's not a nonprofit, you probably don't have a volunteer. Some of those things are a little bit more intuitive, gut check. You can kind of assume that you know the answer, but not all of them. So when you have employment decisions, employment setup questions, it's very important that you contact a lawyer, even if you just get a consultation and then draft the stuff on your own. Wouldn't necessarily advise that. We understand resources are tight. Have a conversation with us or a lawyer to make sure that you're tying up those loose ends. All right, next. You have blow past these.
All right, promissory notes. Real quick, this is just the note, the agreement that says, hey, I'm going to let you borrow this money, usually to purchase something. And here are the terms for paying me back. Promissory note sets out the interest rate, the terms, default, breach types of provisions. These, there's a lot of generic ones out there, like with the residential leases. These are very important if you're having a special kind of arrangement with a non-typical lender, like a non-bank. If you have an individual or investors, get us or somebody, a lawyer, to help write this up, because you want to be specific and contour to exactly how you want to do it, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. You don't have to do it the typical interest rate, whatever that is. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. So collaborations on your farm, on your property. I love these. These are awesome. As a general rule, you need to make sure that you're having conversations with the people that are also doing business on your property. That might be a chef doing a farm dinner. That might be a yoga person coming to do yoga. Just make sure that they have their own insurance. Make sure that you're talking about who's covering what. And for example, going back to those performance licenses agreements, if your yoga instructor is using music, understand that those performance license requirements fall to the venue, not the DJ, not the yoga instructor. So talk about those when you have people on your farm.
All right, security agreement. Just like we're talking about promissory notes for paying something back, security agreements, you can have security agreements for personal goods, you can have mortgages for property, but this is essentially what names the collateral as what you can take if the person falls through on the payment plan, on the promissory note. So be on the lookout for these if you're purchasing something, and know if you get one, especially for personal property, get it registered with the UCC at the Secretary of State, so that everybody out there is on notice of it. Next, please. Chemical drift. All right, so this is the big one to know about this. So if you're farming and you've got neighbors or somebody close by that's spraying, that's contaminating water, that's using chemicals that are bad, that shouldn't be used, illegal or not, report. There are local agencies, local entities at the county and state levels as well. You want to report this, come to us. We'll help get the word out. But better to do it sooner than later. Get folks involved. Oftentimes you can contact the farmer or the person's insurance company because they might be probably using something they're not supposed to be. But yeah, be on the lookout for this and don't wait around, get to moving, because there's are options that can be done to stop it.
And I think this is our 55th tip. We've made it. If you're still with us, awesome. If you've gone, then you won't hear this. So last tip is tenancy in exchange for work. We mentioned that you have to have certain residential requirements if somebody's actually living on your property. You have a farm manager who's also living in the home on the property kind of thing. Also, just be aware from an employment law perspective, tenancy in exchange for work is fine, totally fine, but you have to make sure that it's clearly set out. So you can't just have somebody live on your property and say, okay, you work as much as we want you to work, or have like a woofer or some kind of work exchange program where you just kind of assume that you're following the rules, or they're following the rules. Those policies are really set up. Those reputable groups have very clear policies, bright line policies. You need to make sure that you follow them. Make sure that your employees follow them. You can't volunteer your time. If it's a for-profit operation, no one can volunteer to come and work for you. Generally speaking, there might be a very vague exception, but it would be a rare exception. So just make sure that just because somebody lives on your property, a tent, for example, may not be justifiable in terms of having provided proper shelter for that person while they're on the farm. So that's it, you guys. We had a couple of minutes barely. I kind of hit the volunteer.
I got a couple.
Yeah, why don't you hit those?
Samantha,
LLCs?
is there a time when not to LLC? Probably not. I mean, let me tell you this. There's probably not a time not to do a business entity. Your accountant, I don't know if they're saying maybe from a tax perspective not to do it, which I understand, but from a liability perspective, I would never say not to. Now, I'd love to chat more and see the situation, but more likely than not, you will need a business entity of some sort to protect you on liability. And then on general thoughts about a S versus C Corp on LLC, need to know more details, but probably S Corp for tax purposes. That's what we do, most likely what you would do, but we could explore that to see if there's any other.
And I think that's one more little circling back to what you guys wanted to talk about with when you don't need a lawyer, your CPA can be invaluable. I have quarterly calls with our CPA just to learn, just say, hey, we're encountering this, or I've got a client with that. They aren't lawyers, but they understand tax law and they have tips and tricks, and they're creative in a lot of ways that we don't always think of. So CPA is another time where you might be able to get the advice you need and not use a lawyer. But we'd love to have you.
Okay. You did it. 55 legal tips. And if you kind of discount the little technical malfunction earlier, you definitely handled that in 55 minutes. I'm impressed.
Right.
I am impressed. And that little malfunction was my computer just saying, nope, I'm done. So our own Mary Beth Miller stepped in and helped us out. So big thanks to Mary Beth.
Yes, thank you guys for coming to the rescue. You're awesome.
Yeah.
We did note that
saved the day.
LLC information seems to be kind of a hot topic. Here's the thing: if you guys will just go to our website, cedargrove.law, if you click on schedule a consultation, those are not we're not charging for those. That's a 15-minute call with one of us. We'd be happy to chat with you. I don't know that we really have any more virtual exhibitor booth hours, so go to the website. We'd be happy to chat with you.
Well, and folks can still visit the trade show just to get your contact information. The trade show rooms, I guess, are open for another 15 minutes, but you guys probably want to get a glass of water or something. So understandable if you're not there.
Or wine,
Yeah. That's where I'm headed. So I know that we will be happy to point anybody who asks in your direction.
Great.
Again, congratulations for getting through that in 55 minutes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was fun. I had a lot of fun.
I thought, I wasn't sure if I needed to have a stopwatch or something and just call you out, but I'm glad I let you flow with it because it was
awesome.
a lovely thing to witness, and I was doubled over with the squirrel slide.
Isn't that the best?
That was my favorite.
Oh yeah,
that's my favorite
one. iStock is my favorite place. I love iStock so much.
Yeah. That squirrel had some stuff to say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any parting wisdom?
I can't think of any.
I think you've
Pick your
given us
peppers.
enough.
It's gonna freeze tonight.
Yeah,
if
it's
your
gonna
peppers
freeze.
didn't already
Go
freeze,
get your peppers out of the garden.
I got mine today.
Yeah.
Y'all probably already know that. You don't need a lawyer telling you that.
Exactly. That's telling
Wouldn't
us that.
hurt.
Right? No,
Yeah.
we really love CFSA so much because there's the education available. We learn, we sit in these sessions and learn too. So I would just say, if there's anything we can do to help answer questions, I mean, we're here when you need us, but we're also just here as a quick reference if you have questions. So.
And I'll come to you. I love making farm
John
visits,
loves to go
site
to the
visits.
farm.
I don't think it's fair if you're not out there seeing what's going on and being a part of it. So, and that's free of charge. You're not charged for that. I'll come out, meet with you, talk with you, set it all up, whether you hire us or not. I love the site visits. Love meeting folks.
Well, I hope you two can see all of the praise that you're getting in the comments. That was wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I can put a couple of them up here.
I see. That's so sweet. You guys are awesome.
Thank y'all.
Yeah. So thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody who attended and asked questions. And
yeah, good questions.
See you around. I hope that you folks can join us for the policy happy hour in a little while.
But if 6:30, right?
That's right. We'll be there.
Cool. All right. Well, I look forward to that. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.